morning, New Prague area community and New Prague area schools. Welcome to our 8th edition of Supt Talk. Good morning, Mr. Dittberner.
Good morning, Tony.
Can you give us a little update here? It's the end of February, we're almost into March, and that means tournament time for athletics and activities. Give us a little update on what's going on with the school.
Well, we just, this past Sunday, we had 526 students in grades 5 through 12 performing in our high school gym. It was a panorama of bands. It was an awesome performance, and it was great to see. I guess the highlight so far this week, the big thing is our boys hockey team making it to the state tournament for the second year in a row, and we'll find out when they play next Wednesday shortly. I think on Saturday they'll be doing the seeding process. So that's very exciting. You know, it was disappointing. I think it was dance team, gymnastics, wrestling, all had tough defeats right to the finals there. I mean, we could have had more teams going to the state, but they had great seasons, and it was finally nice to get over the hump with one of our teams to get to the state tournament. So we got boys basketball playing in the semifinals of sections this Saturday. So, you know, they've got a good chance to advance in section play. And then, of course, our girls basketball team's ranked 3rd in the state. And right now we've got 4 wrestlers that are won section championships that are wrestling today on Friday and hopefully tomorrow. So they've all got great chances to place high at the state tournament. I should mention those 4 wrestlers just off the top of my head here: James Berg, Griffin Perriott, Chase Logelin, and Nick Knudsen. So yeah, we're really proud of their efforts and look forward to seeing how they're going to do today and tomorrow, and then likewise with the other teams I mentioned.
Good. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the 8th edition of Supt Talk. We're here today with someone who most likely will be very familiar to many of you, especially if you've lived around the area of New Prague. I've been here for 20 years, my family and I, and Mr. Chuck Kajer is probably one of the first people that I met as I came to New Prague, and he has been a wonderful influence on me as an early educator and teacher, coach, and we would like to welcome Mr. Chuck Kajer to our show today.
Thanks,
Chuck?
Tony. Tim?
So we, as I said, Chuck, you've been around New Prague for quite some time, but yet we've got a lot of people that watch Supt Talk here, familiarize themselves with the New Prague Times and the paper, but give us a little bit of a background on Chuck Kajer, where he came from and how he got to where he is today.
Well, I grew up in New Prague, graduated from New Prague High School in 1978, back when the middle school was in its 2nd year, so I went through the split shift era back in the early 70s. My 9th grade year, we went to school from noon until 5. My 10th grade year, we went to school from 7 a.m. to noon, so we had a lot of strange sleep habits back in those days, and the community has just continued to grow ever since I went away to school. I was a teacher at one time, taught for 5 years and coached, and then got out of that business, got into the newspaper business, and after a few years there, I ended up back in my hometown. And I started with the New Prague Times in 1990, and except for about a 2.5-year span, since then, I have been here ever since.
Well, Chuck, it's great to have you here. One thing you left out there is where you went to college.
Well, I went to one of the, what your son would probably agree is one of the finest academic institutions in Minnesota, St. John's University. I graduated from there in 1982, and and then my teaching took me down to southeastern Minnesota. Actually, it was my wife's nursing career took me down to southeastern Minnesota, but I was at Wyckoff High School where I coached basketball for a couple years, and Lyle, and then I 1 year teaching in Blooming Prairie, which the principal there was Darwin Bostic, who was a former administrator here at New Prague. Wow. And then my last teaching job was in Renville Sacred Heart out in western Minnesota.
Okay. Well, you know, obviously working for the New Prague Times, covering all the school activities and everything. Talk about a typical week, what that looks like, your deadlines and stuff like that. I'm not sure, I mean, I have a rough idea, but how does it all work?
I'm not sure there is a typical week. Every week is different, and you were talking about all the activities and the state tournament possibilities. I was just talking with my wife last night about what the calendar could look like for the next few weeks, and it was not pretty. But between basketball, boys and girls basketball, adaptive floor hockey, and boys hockey and wrestling, I'm going to be putting a lot of miles on my Honda Fit in the next few weeks. So.
That's awesome. What do you like most about your job?
The fact that it's never the same thing twice. Even though I cover some of the events, some of the same events year to year, there's always something different each time. I enjoy becoming part of the community as well, knowing everything about what's going on. Not that I'm a know-it-all, but I think when I worked at the newspaper in Medelia, it kind of struck me what the job is all about. We moved there at the same time that the new nursing administrator started out. We were both about the same age. He was one of the first people I interviewed. His wife was a nurse just like mine, and we had kids the same age, and so we got to know each other during the time we were there. And around the time when I left, we were talking, and he was talking about, it's a real tough town to be in because everyone is, everyone has their groups, and it's not a very welcoming community. And I told him I found it was just the opposite. That it was a very welcoming community, but my job was to be part of the community, to be at some of the meetings, to meet the people. That was part of the job, and that's one thing I like about this job is getting to meet people, getting to interview coaches and teachers and city council members and just members of the community. I've had a chance to meet some people that I would not have met without this job, and some great people, and I've written a lot of great stories.
That's what I was just going to ask you. What's your favorite story, favorite article, or favorite interview that you've done that's turned into an article? Can you maybe mention one or two?
I have been at this job in this business for 27 years now, and at New Prague for about 24 of those years. And I really don't know if I can pick out any one. Just in the last few weeks, I think, you talked about the Panorama of Band concert, and I decided that we needed to give them some good attention. I'd covered it before and had a few photos, but I decided we needed to do something more with the music because we've been doing so much with the sports, and we needed to recognize the other activities as well. And this week I did a front page thing with 3 or 4 photos and a story about the concert. I talked to Mr. Thorstad. I didn't get a chance to talk to the other 2 directors, but it really showcases the talent, and New Prague has a strong tradition of instrumental music. If you look at the mural downtown on the side of one of the buildings, it shows the New Prague Philharmonic Band, and New Prague, because of its Czech heritage, is very big into music, and so that's an important part of the community right there.
Absolutely. I mean, we always say academics, arts, and athletics, and I was interesting. You mentioned that is that. At the former school district I was at, there's a retired couple, and they're talking about moving, out of the cities and Northfield, New Prague, or whatever. I said, and I know they love the arts, and I said, New Prague, I mean, people sometimes think sports and athletics, but as far as with theater, with music, whether it's choir or instrumental music and stuff like that, art, it's phenomenal, and we have a lot to be proud of, and whether it's in the school or things that are going on outside the school. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. And the theater, I'd agree with you there too. And I don't cover so much the theater for a couple reasons. One, because Patrick Fisher, our staff writer, has a little more experience in that area, and it's one area that I know that he'll do a good job in, and because of his experience there. Just like I do the sports because I've got more of the background in sports, so I take care of the sports coverage, and so he covers the theater. But I know that there's a strong theatrical tradition that goes way back to one of my favorite teachers when I was going here, and that's Ralph Pommier. I was in a lot of his classes. I was in a couple of his plays, and he set a strong tradition. We had a lot of people back in the late 70s, early 80s who went on to professional theater. I'm not going to say a lot, but a few. And he set the tone, and people like Val Drummerhausen and now the TGs and people between them have really kept that tradition going too.
Yeah, and I know at the high school here, Mr. Seifert, our high school principal, we've got now 2 theater classes being offered in registration now, so we're trying to up the opportunities in those areas too.
That's a big change from the 9 people that were in my theater class with Mr. Pommier. So,
how about the New Prague Times? Let's talk about the circulation, and then could you talk a little bit about just with that circulation, with how that works with the online and the future of the newspaper business, because everyone wonders about that.
well, everybody talks about newspapers are dying, and newspapers are not. We've not found that to be the case. We have a circulation of about 4,500 people, or 4,500 subscriptions, I should say. The industry standard, they figure there's about 2.5 people read every issue. So that means we have, if you do the math, around 12,000, 13,000 people that read our paper each week.
Right.
In addition, we have our online presence, which we're always looking at ways to improve it. We've started a Facebook page also in the last year. And we don't do a lot with that right now, but it's something that's going to be increasing as we move along. The newspaper has been around for 125 years. This is our 126th year right now.
Wow.
And it's been owned by the Sewell/Wan family since before 1917, I think I want to say. So the same family has owned it for all those years. And they have put a lot of time and effort into establishing the Times as a reliable source of information. And we're proud to be representing not only New Prague, but we also own newspapers in Montgomery, Waterville, and Elysian. We cover a lot of LeSueur County. We do cover a lot of stuff in Lonsdale and Elko, New Market in our paper. We try to be, with the New Prague Times, we basically try to cover the entire school district, not just New Prague itself, so, because that's what our audience is.
That's good. Yeah, I know, my parents up in Alexandria and in-laws and I will both subscribe to the paper, enjoy reading it, and I can tell you as superintendent of schools, people do read the paper. I mean, you do you cover our events, you cover our school board meetings and whatever, like you said, the panorama bands, and people do, they do know what's going on. It's a major source of information in our communities, whether it be, like you said, New Prague, Elko, Newmarket, Lonsdale, all parts in between.
You know, and I know we have a close relationship with the school and the paper, of course, as you cover our school. Chuck, do you encourage people, if they see news or if they think there's news, to contact the New Prague Times? I mean, what do you kind of tell people?
Definitely. You know, the way we get our news has changed a lot in the 25 years since I started here. When I first started in the newspaper business, I was kind of amazed when I was the editor at the LeSueur News Herald. And the first day I get there and the secretary brings in a stack of mail about that tall. And I'm looking at this like, wow. Well, I quickly found out that there are things I get in the mail every day that I look at, I don't even need to open them up because it's just press releases from national things. But you have to look through everything. Well, now, if I get 3 or 4 envelopes a day, it's a lot. Everything comes in by email. We get we look around on the internet for using Google News and Twitter to find out what's happening around the area. I try to post the sports scores on Tuesday nights, and I get those a lot of times by Twitter or by the internet, and we post them online right away. The way we get our news has changed, but the best way to make sure something gets in the paper is to let us know about it. We may not get it in the paper that particular week, but if nobody tells us something's going on, we're not going to be able to, we don't necessarily always know about it. There's only basically a 2-person news staff, about 10 people on our staff, and we all keep our ears open, and we're always looking for news stories, for news ideas, because we don't want to have the same thing in the paper each week. We want to have different stuff. We want to feature different people. We want to feature different groups. And we're always looking for new ideas. So we encourage people to let us know. And my email is news@newpragetimes.com, and that's the best way to get a hold of me and let us know what's going on.
Well, you do a good job getting it. And I know, I think it was Tom Doig, our former high school principal, tagged you with the name Scoop.
Actually, that predated Tom Doig.
Oh, did it?
I think I got that name.
Chuck Scoop Kajer.
I got that nickname one of my first weeks on the job here. There was a car accident about 2 blocks away from the Times office. We heard it on the scanner, and I went over there, and I beat the cops there, and Brian Studer, who was a retired police officer and was a good friend of my dad, saw me, and he's the one that tagged me with that name. So.
Well, maybe it was just Doug used to call you out on it very loudly.
Yeah. He'd always call me Scoop. Yeah. He's
So Chuck, whoever came up with the idea of the question of the week?
The question of the week, that was something that when I worked at the Lesueur News Herald, that was owned by a chain of newspapers, and that was one thing that they kind of required all of their papers to have at that time. And it's a good way of getting people's opinions. Yep. And so we brought that, we did it here for a while in the 90s, and we kind of got away from it, and then we brought it back maybe 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, we brought it back, and you know, we come up with some interesting questions. We had one on Kevin Garnett this week that kind of just popped in.
Yep.
A few weeks earlier, we had one on Ron Johnson, and that one, you know, normally we'll just ask people on the street, and that one I had a few contacts from people in and out of the community who knew Ron Johnson back in the days, and so I had fun with that one.
Yeah, I think that's a go-to. People read that right away or go to that right away. You know how people read, some go front to back, some just page through and pick their stories, but I think they go that quick. I do. I'd like that.
It's one of the
police report too. The police report. It's amazing how many loose barking dogs we have in this town.
But you know what? The number one thing that is read by most people, the most read part of the paper, is the obituaries.
Yep. Really?
People want to see who died, and I know for this week I've got parents of 2 classmates now just came in yesterday that died. It's, you know, it's interesting to see what you know. People want to know who's dying, what's new in the community, what's gone, and it's very well read.
All right.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, and we are just wrapping up our conversation with Mr. Chuck Kajer from the New Prague Times. And Chuck, we just thank you so very much for being with us. Tim had already talked about, but we just thank you so very much for what you do for the schools and really to kind of what we talk about all the time, what you do for kids. You're very focused on the kids here at the New Prague area schools, and we appreciate the support that you do give us. Any parting final comments from Scoop Kajer before we dismiss?
Well, you know, the school is an important part of the community where we do our best to cover that, as well as everything with the city and the people of the community. I know one thing that Tim wants to talk about yet is the bond referendum coming up, and we'll be doing a lot of coverage on that. People are asking questions, and you know, we'll do our best to get the information out there to people so they can make up their minds on whether or not to support the issue.
Well, we thank you very much for being with us, and that's kind of a good segue, Mr. Dittberner. I believe it was 2 weeks ago in the New Prague Times. The question of the week was about the school referendum, and probably was maybe one of the first times that people had heard about that. So why don't you just give us a little update on the May 5th vote? Yeah,
the main thing is we want people to make educated decisions. So we're going to have information on our district website beginning on Monday, March 2nd. And with that, there'll be an information type of document that contains everything you need to know about it. There'll be a question and answers. You might want to come frequently ask questions and answers document on the website. There will also be a email/phone hotline. So if there's information that isn't on that sheet or not answered in one of the questions, you can email or make a phone call, and we'll respond immediately or within 24 hours. So we'll probably have a video of just what the factual information is regarding the referendum, and all that on our website starting, like I said, Monday, March 2nd. I will also be going around spending the first week or two presenting to employee groups, and then I've got a full schedule of community groups in March and April, along with, we'll have 3 open meetings, and that information will be, when those open meetings are, will be on the website. So like I said, we want people to make an educated decision, be able to take a look at all the information before they vote on May 5th.
Okay. So as Mr. Dittberner said, definitely visit the website. and there's going to be a link specifically to referendum information that I know we're working on right now. And you can always call and make the phone calls. We'll have all that information on the New Prague Schools website. We would like to again thank Mr. Kajer for being with us today. And we thank you very much for tuning in to the 8th episode of Supt Talk. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.